Picture a chessboard in Zurich in 1953. 3 games tonight across 36 years. 3 different men playing black in 3 different countries. And after 12 moves, 2 of these 3 boards are the same board. Not a similar position, not the same idea in a different arrangement. The same squares, piece for piece and pawn for pawn, in Switzerland in 1953 and in an insurance office in the Netherlands in 1989. Nobody planned that. They had simply both arrived at the same bargain. The bargain is this: black allows white to build a wall of pawns across the middle of the board and does not contest it. Black lets it stand, and then walks pawns down the other side of the board, very slowly, toward the white king. It is called the King's Indian Defense. For a long time it was thought to be simply bad. A word about what's true here and what isn't. The moves are exactly the moves that were played. They come straight from the game's own record. The stories around them are older and softer. Some is well documented, some is legend, retold for 100 years. Where it's legend, I'll say so, rather than hand you a certainty that isn't there. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love reading them. London at midnight, Manila at breakfast, all of us in different hours, watching the same pieces move. 3 games in the order they were played: 1953, 1960, 1989. All 3 of them won by black. Find a comfortable place to rest, and whenever you're ready, let your eyes close. We begin in Switzerland in the autumn. This game was played in Switzerland in the autumn of 1953. It comes from a tournament to decide who would challenge the world champion. 15 players and nearly 2 months of chess. They began at the end of August in a small town called Neuhausen am Rheinfall, in a parish hall. The town is named after what is beside it. The Rhine Falls, the largest waterfall in Europe, going over the rocks a few minutes' walk from where they were playing. The players and their seconds all stayed in the same hotel there. It is not standing anymore. After 8 rounds, they moved to Zurich, to a chamber music hall in the Congress building, and finished the other 22 there. Everyone played everyone twice, 210 games in all. 9 of the 15 came from the Soviet Union. Vasily Smyslov won it by 2 clear points. He went to Moscow the following spring to play Botvinnik for the title, and the match was drawn, and Botvinnik kept it. It is remembered as one of the strongest tournaments ever held. Several of the players thought so as well. They each went home and wrote a book about it. David Bronstein's is the famous one. It is still in print, 70 years later, and many people will tell you it is the best chess book ever written. Bronstein said, much later and quite cheerfully, that a great deal of the actual writing was done by his friend Boris Weinstein. The ideas were his. Most of the sentences were not. The other book was written by the man playing black tonight. It came out in Buenos Aires, in Spanish, in 2 volumes, and it waited 58 years for an English edition. The white pieces belonged to Mark Taimanov, a Soviet player, 27 years old. Taimanov had another life alongside chess. He was a concert pianist. He performed as a duo with his wife, Lyubov Bruk. In the Soviet Union, he was considered among the very finest. So he spent his life between 2 instruments, 64 squares, and 88 keys. The black pieces belonged to Miguel Najdorf. Najdorf was born in Poland. In the summer of 1939, he sailed to Buenos Aires to play for his country in the Chess Olympiad. He was still there in the middle of the tournament when the war began. He never went home. He stayed in Argentina, and in time he became Argentinian. His family did not survive the war, and in the years afterwards he did something quite remarkable. He played blindfold chess, dozens of games at once, without sight of a single board. 40 games at once in Buenos Aires, then 45 in São Paulo. He did it partly for the record, and partly so that his name would be printed in newspapers all over the world, in case anyone who had known him was still alive to read it. He was never a professional player. He sold insurance in Buenos Aires and did rather well at it, and played chess anyway. That is the man sitting behind the black pieces tonight. The opening they played is called the King's Indian Defense, and in 1953 it was a very new thing to be doing. Black allows white to build a great wall of pawns across the middle of the board and does not contest it. For most of the history of the game, that was simply thought to be bad. Siegbert Tarrasch, who wrote the textbook everyone learned from, dismissed it in one line. It leaves the opponent too much freedom in the center. Which is a little unfair of him, because he had played it himself, once, in 1885. Then, after the Second War, a handful of players began to look at it again. Bronstein was one. Boleslavsky, Geller, Gligoric, and Najdorf. Bronstein put a number on how quickly it turned. At the World Championship of 1948, out of 50 games, the King's Indian appeared in 2. At Zurich, 5 years later, it was the most played opening of the whole tournament. Something over 40 games out of the 210. 1 in 5. And there is a lovely admission buried in Bronstein's book about how seriously they were all taking it. In the first round, Gideon Stahlberg played against the King's Indian and handled it beautifully. Stahlberg finished the tournament last, of 15. When Bronstein's own turn came to play him, he wrote, he could not muster the courage to use the opening at all. He played something else instead and got a worse position out of it. There is one more thread, and it runs from the other side of the world. 6 months before tonight in March, there had been a tournament at Mar del Plata on the coast of Argentina. Najdorf played there. So did a Yugoslav named Svetozar Gligoric, who won the tournament. And in their game against each other, Najdorf had the white pieces, and Gligoric played the same defense, with a new arrangement of his pieces that nobody had tried before. Gligoric said later that he prepared it in his hotel room in about 10 minutes. He also said, decades later, that he had been too shy to claim it as his own for 30 years. Najdorf lost that game, and then he did the sensible thing, which was to steal the idea. 6 months later, he is in Switzerland with the black pieces, playing the arrangement that beat him. And Taimanov, sitting opposite, has not seen the Argentine games. In 1953, news from Mar del Plata took a long time to reach Europe. Bronstein put it plainly, writing about this very game. Najdorf had absorbed the Yugoslav analysis, which ran to at least the 21st move. Taimanov was still confident from his earlier wins. Both men sat down expecting to be pleased. The game they played was given one of the tournament's brilliancy prizes. Bronstein wrote that the opening and the middle game were conducted by Najdorf with such mastery that a third phase never became necessary. There is a small unkindness in it too, which nobody arranged. The line Taimanov chose carries his own name in the books. He lost the famous game in his own variation. So, black lets the wall stand, and then, very slowly, begins to walk pawns down the other side of the board toward the white king. White will do the same thing in the other direction, toward the black king. 2 attacks, on opposite wings, racing. In a race like that, a single move of head start is worth more than a piece, which is why this opening produces so few quiet draws and so many wrecks. So here is the bargain both men have struck, and what each of them is quietly hoping for. White takes the center, a broad chain of pawns across the middle of the board, more space, more room to move his pieces about behind them. Black gives that up on purpose. He tucks his king away in the corner, but conquers a bishop onto the long diagonal, and waits. The whole idea is that a big center is also a target. Black wants to lean on it, to poke at it, until it either advances or cracks. And once white pushes those center pawns forward, the board tips onto a slant. The pawns point one way, and the 2 players go hunting in opposite directions. White marches on the side where he has more room. Black throws his own pawns forward on the other side, straight at the white king. It becomes a foot race with the kings as the finish lines. Whoever arrives first wins. The one who arrives second rarely gets to arrive at all. That is why a player will take the cramped, patient side of this, not to survive it, to win the race from behind. So the questions for tonight are these. Whose attack lands first, the one with more space or the one aimed at the king? What did Taimanov, confident and unprepared, walk into that Najdorf had already studied to the 20th move and beyond? And when it is over and only one king is still standing, how much of the winner's army did it actually take? Let your eyes close now and let the board come up out of the dark, the wall of pawns across the center, the 2 kings in their corners, and the quiet before either side begins to run. White begins by pushing the queen's pawn 2 squares to d4. It plants a foot in the center and asks the first quiet question of the evening. Black answers by lifting the king's knight to f6. The knight leans against e4 before white has even claimed it. No hurry, no contact yet, just watching. White widens the front, the c-pawn stepping up to c4. 2 broad pawns now, side by side on the 4th rank, a wall of space that black must find a way to live behind or under. And black chooses under. The g-pawn slides 1 square to g6. This is the king's Indian invitation. Black will let white build the big center, then lean on it from the flank. It is the soundest move on the board, and it commits black to a certain kind of patience. White develops the queen's knight to c3. The knight braces the e4 square, so that when the pawn goes there, it will be defended, not loose. Black fills the little home just opened, the bishop settling on g7. Now, look along that dark diagonal. From g7, the bishop stares the whole length of the board, through the center, toward the far corner. For many moves, it will seem to do nothing. It is doing everything. It is the reason the whole opening exists. White takes the center in full, the king's pawn advancing to e4. Now 3 white pawns command the middle, c4, d4, e4, a broad, handsome, and slightly heavy wall. Modern analysis calls this the most exact way to play it. White is not being greedy. White is being ambitious. Black replies with the small, patient move, the d pawn to d6. It looks meek. It has a job. It guards e5, the square black means to strike from next, and it opens a window for the light bishop. White brings the last minor piece toward the fight, the king's knight to f3. It supports d4 and eyes e5, the very square both sides are quietly circling. Black tucks the king away, castling on the king's side. The king slips to g8, the rook comes to f8, and already there is a small irony hidden in that. Black is putting the king exactly where, in a few moves, black will throw open the front door and storm forward with the pawns in front of it. White answers calmly, the light bishop stepping to e2. A modest square, but the right one. The bishop is safe, the rook is connected, and white is simply finished developing in good order. Now black strikes at the center. The king's pawn jumps to e5. This is the heartbeat of the whole system. Black offers a pawn trade in the middle and dares white to resolve the tension. If white takes on e5, the position opens and grows peaceful. That is not what happens here. First, white finishes the king into safety, castling kingside. Both kings now sit on the g-file, g1 and g8, mirror images, each behind 3 unmoved pawns. For the moment, both are perfectly snug. Remember that mirror. Over the next dozen moves it will break, and which king's shelter breaks first is the whole story. Black develops the queen's knight to c6, pressing on d4. It adds a second attacker to that central pawn and quietly pokes at white, asking the question again, will you keep the tension or resolve it? White resolves it and does so by advancing the d-pawn thrusting to d5. This is the great fork in the road of the king's Indian, the center locks. The pawn on d5 kicks the knight and shuts the door. And here is the pact both players silently sign. The pawns interlock on the diagonal, white's on e4 and d5, black's on e5 and d6. That chain leans to one side. White's points toward the queen side, black's points toward the king. So each army will attack where its pawns are already pointing. White will roll forward on the queen side. Black will hurl the king side pawns at the white king. It becomes a race, pure and stark. The knight, kicked from c6, retreats to e7. It looks backward, but it is heading somewhere. From e7, it can reroute toward the king side, toward g6 and the coming storm. This is the known path, the best square, part of a plan every king's Indian player knows in the bones. Now white begins a long, deliberate maneuver. The f3 knight steps back to e1. It seems to undevelop, and it does, but the knight was blocking white's own f-pawn, and white wants that pawn free. From e1, the knight will travel to d3, where it supports the queenside push and guards the tender squares near its king. Black mirrors the idea on the other wing. The f6 knight drops back to d7. It clears the f-pawn's road. Black is loading the catapult. The f-pawn must be free to fly. White develops the dark bishop to e3, out toward the queenside where the action will be. It eyes the a7 pawn along the diagonal and stands ready to support the pawn storm white is about to launch. And now black fires the first shot of the kingside attack. The f-pawn advances to f5. There it is, the break that defines the game. Black strikes at e4 and threatens to tear open the lines in front of the white king's own march. The race is truly on. Both players are now sprinting in opposite directions, and the one who arrives late gets mated. White shores up the center with the f-pawn to f3. It braces e4 so the pawn cannot be swept away, and it keeps the position closed on white's own terms. This is the precise reply. White declines to open the f-file, because an open f-file would help black's attack, not white's. Black does not trade. Instead, the pawn charges on to f4. A telling decision. Black keeps the kingside closed and clamps the bishop on e3, whose retreat squares are now being fenced off. The pawn on f4 is the tip of an avalanche. Behind it, the g-pawn and h-pawn will come rolling down toward g1. White saves the bishop before it is trapped, sliding it back to f2. From f2, it still watches the long diagonal toward the black king, and it sits safely out of the pawn's path. It is the only good square, and white finds it. The bishop lives to fight on the far wing. Now black keeps the wave moving. The G pawn advances to G5. This is the sound of the storm gathering. The pawn supports F4 and prepares G4, prying at the F3 point that shields white's king. Picture the king side now. Black's pawns stand on F4 and G5, with H7 still home, a slow wave curling toward the white king. Behind them the pieces wait, the knight on D7 ready to swing out, the bishop on G7 still glaring down the long diagonal. White has no time to admire it. The knight completes its journey and lands on D3. From D3 it does double duty. It prepares the C5 break on the queen side, and it covers E5 and F4, poking back at black's chain. This is exactly where the knight was always going. 9 moves ago it began the walk, now it arrives on its best square. Black brings a fresh attacker toward the front. The knight returns to F6. Now it aims at G4 and H5, the launching squares for the assault. Every black piece is quietly turning to face the white king. The knight had cleared the F-pawn's road, and its errand done, it comes back to join the hunt. This is the best square for it too. Now white opens the queen side in earnest. The C-pawn drives forward to C5. This is white's version of the same violence black is doing on the other wing, a pawn thrust to crack open lines near the enemy, here around D6 and the queen side. The two attacks are now both in motion at once, and every move from here is measured in tempo. Whoever is one move slow will lose. Black ignores it entirely and keeps building the attack, the knight from E7 swinging to G6. This is the point of that long-ago retreat. From G6, the knight guards F4, keeping the spearhead of the pawn chain firmly in place. And from G6, it stands ready to leap into H4 or F4's wake, adding a piece to the wave of pawns already rolling. See the whole board as it now stands. The center is locked, pawns interlocked from E4 to D6, and neither king can be reached through the middle. So both armies pour around the edges. White's pawn on C5 bites at the queen side, the knight on D3 and the bishop on F2 lean that way. And black's king side is a coiled spring, pawns on F4 and G5, knights on F6 and G6, the G7 bishop waiting, the rook on F8 behind it all. Both kings still sit where they castled. G1 and G8, each still behind its little screen of pawns, but those screens will not stay whole for long. The question hanging over the board is simply speed. Black wants G4 and H5 to smash the F3 point and open the white king. White wants to prise open the queen side and the C-file to reach the black king's backdoor first. It is a foot race between two attacks that will never meet in the middle, only at the finish. White moves first, and the rook on A1 slides across to C1. It settles behind the pawn on C5, lending its weight to the one lever white has on this side of the board. The plan is patient and slow. Pile up on the C-file, break with C5 takes D6, and pour down the open line into black's queenside. Modern analysis calls this the finest square for the rook, no hurry, only the quiet gathering of force. Black answers in the same key. The rook on F8 lifts one square to F7. It steps off the back rank onto the 7th, where it guards G7 and can later swing along the row or double behind a pawn. Both players are loading their guns before either one fires. This too is judged the best move. White lifts the C1 rook again, just one square to C2. Now it rides the second rank and the corner is cleared for its partner to follow onto the C-file behind it. Doubling the rooks, the old queenside recipe, two heavy pieces stacked on a single open line. Black draws the dark bishop back from G7 to F8. It looks like a retreat, and it is won, but with a purpose. The bishop clears g7 to begin a long march toward the kingside, where the real fight is coming. For now it also keeps a watch on d6, the pawn about to come under fire. White strikes. The pawn on c5 captures on d6. The first true contact of the middle game, a pawn given up to tear open the file White has spent all this time preparing. Black must choose which pawn recaptures, and the choice will shape the whole queenside. Black takes back with the c-pawn, capturing on d6. The colder modern eye approves. The c-file is fully open now, yet Black's chain stays solid. d6 holds up e5, and the center does not crack. Recapturing the other way would have left a lonely weakling behind. This keeps the wall whole. White brings the queen out from d1 to d2. She joins the rooks and looks toward the far side, toward a5 and the dark squares she hopes to invade once the file cracks all the way open. Everything White does leans one way now, the queenside, away from his own king. And here Black begins the answering charge. The g-pawn pushes to g4. This is the footrace made visible, White massing on the left, Black's pawns rolling toward the white king on the right. The pawn on g4 leans against f3, the little pillar standing in front of White's castle. White does not flinch. He completes his plan. The f1 rook swings across to c1. Two rooks stacked on the open c-file now, a column of force aimed at Black's back rank. Modern analysis calls it best. But White has committed. There is no turning the heavy pieces around in time if the kingside should catch fire. Hold the whole board still a moment. White's king sits on g1, behind pawns on f3, g2 and h2, with the two bishops on e2 and f2 guarding the approach. Both white rooks stand quiet on the c-file, the queen on d2, the knights on c3 and d3 watching the middle. Black's king rests on g8, his pawns on e5, f4 and g4 form a spearhead, and behind them wait two knights, a bishop, a queen and a rook, all leaning toward that king. White points one way, Black the other. Whoever arrives first will win. Black drives on. The pawn crashes forward to g3. It stabs at both f2 and h2, the two pawns shielding the white king, and demands an answer. Modern analysis says this is the right instant, strike while White's pieces are all facing the wrong way. White takes, the h-pawn capturing on g3. Opening a file so near his own king is a danger, but leaving that pawn alive was the greater one. Best, says the modern eye. Black recaptures, the f4 pawn taking on g3. Now a black pawn sits on g3, one step from the white king's shell, jammed between f2 and h2. Best again, Black keeps the pawn alive, a splinter lodged deep in White's defenses. White removes it. The bishop from f2 captures on g3. The splinter is gone, but the king is bearer for it, the pawn cover thinned to almost nothing. It was the only clean way to clear the square. Modern analysis marks it best. Black pounces. The knight springs from f6 to h5. It attacks the bishop that just landed on g3, and it eyes f4, a fine dark outpost beside the king. The best move, every tempo now bends toward White's cornered monarch. White tucks the bishop back into the corner, to h2, out of the knight's reach. It still holds the long dark diagonal, but it is passive there, pressed against its own edge behind the king. Black carries on the redeployment. The dark bishop steps from f8 to e7. This is the road it mapped 3 moves ago, g7 to f8 to e7, and next toward g5 and the dark squares by the white king. Best. White makes a strange, humble move. The knight retreats all the way from c3 back to b1. It looks like surrender of the center, but it is a lifeline, The knight means to return through d2 to defend the king that everything else is abandoned. Black calmly develops the last quiet piece, the light bishop from c8 to d7. Best. Every black man is in the game now, all of them leaning toward g1, while white's forces are torn between two errands. White hauls the queen back, from d2 to e1. She lets the queenside dream go and hurries home to guard, standing at her king's side to hold the dark squares. The attack has forced white into pure defense. Black swings the dark bishop from e7 to g5. It arrives with menace, staring down at e3 and c1, threatening to plant itself among white's pieces. White finishes the knight's long journey, from b1 home to d2, the best defense there is. The knight reaches the shelter it set out for, propping up f1 and f3, patching the holes around the king. And now black crashes the bishop into e3. Check. The diagonal from e3 through the empty f2 to g1 runs straight into the white king, and nothing on the board can capture the bishop where it stands. It sits deep inside white's camp, defiant, striking the king from across the position. White must move the king. White steps into the corner, the king to h1. Best. It hides behind the bishop on h2, off that deadly diagonal, but the corner is a lonely place with the black army closing in. See it whole again. The white king is buried on h1, the bishop on h2 before it, the light bishop on e2, a knight on d2, the queen on e1, rooks on c1 and d3. Around them press the black forces, a bishop deep on e3, a knight on h5, another knight on g6, a rook on f7, the king safe on g8. White is folded into one corner, black owns the space and the initiative both. Now the queen enters. Black lifts her from d8 to g5. She takes the very square the bishop just left and joins the hunt, queen and bishop and knight all converging on the trapped white king. The threats are gathering faster than white can find answers for them. White drops the light bishop back, from e2 to f1. It shores up g2 and the squares around the corner, one more defender dragged to the wall. Black brings the last rook over, from a8 to f8. Both black rooks stand on the f-file now, one on f7, one on f8, a stacked column aimed straight through f2 toward the king beyond. Every single black piece is committed to the attack. White has nothing left in reserve to bring. White shuffles a rook from c1 to d1. The great queenside doubling is fully undone. The rooks that dreamed of invading are called home to guard the center and the first rank. Black pauses the storm for one prudent move. The b-pawn steps to b5. Best. It seals the queenside shut, denying white's knight the c4 square and any counterplay there. A cold-blooded move in the middle of a mating attack, quietly nailing closed the one door white might have escaped through, before turning back to the kill. White tries to pry that door open again. The a-pawn advances to a4. He strikes at b5, hoping to crack a line on the queenside and find some counter thrust before the kingside caves in. But it is the far corner of the board, a long way from the king who needs him, and black's guns are already trained on h1. Black turns to the queenside now, and the move is almost a whisper. The a-pawn slides one square to a6. It braces the pawn on b5 and quietly asks the white a-pawn what it means to do. For all the fire massed on the other wing, black can spend a move on a pawn. The attacking pieces already point where they need to. White takes up the question. The a-pawn captures on b5, and the queenside splits open. A colder modern eye calls this the soundest path, leave the tension, and black alone would choose when it breaks. Black recaptures. The a6 pawn takes back on b5. The a-file lies open now, clear from end to end, but no rook waits to use it. so for the moment it is only empty air. White's rook abandons the defense and drives forward from c2 to c7, deep on the 7th rank. It leans on the bishop at d7 and looks, at last, like counterplay, a rook prowling among black's pawns. But that rook has left the king's side thin, and black's whole game lives on the king's side. Black answers gently. The rook on f7 steps across to g7. It settles onto the g-file, the very lane black means to pry open, and keeps the 7th rank guarded from within. Nothing is forced yet. Black is simply lining the pieces up behind the pawn that shelters the white king. White's knight swings from d2 out to b3, seeking a road to c5. From c5 it would leap on the bishop and the loose queenside squares, White's one true idea, to strike before the storm lands. Left alone, that knight would reach c5 in 2 moves and gnaw at d7 and b7, but black will not leave it alone. Black's guns are quicker. The knight on g6 vaults to h4. From h4 it glares straight down at g2, the lone pawn before the white king, and grazes f3 besides. This is the finest move available, the first black hand laid on the king's own doorstep. The pawn on f3 is the hinge of White's whole camp, loosen it, and the light squares around the king turn to holes. See the whole board as it stands. The white king hides on h1, a bishop at its shoulder on h2, and one pawn on g2 for a roof. White's queen sits back on e1, rooks on c7 and d1, the light bishop on f1, knights on b3 and d3. Black has poured forward, the queen on g5, knights on h4 and h5, a bishop rammed deep into e3, a rook lifted to g7. Every black piece leans toward the corner where the white king breathes through a single pawn. For black to win, that pawn on g2 must fall and the king be caught before White's scattered pieces arrive. For White, the storm has only to be survived. White sees it and hurries back. The straying rook returns all the way from c7 to c2. On the 2nd rank it guards g2 along the row, the roof propped up just in time. For a moment it looks steady, 3 defenders, 3 attackers, and even fight over 1 square. Black brings a 3rd attacker to the square. The bishop leaves d7 and travels the long diagonal to h3. Now bishop and knight both bear down on g2, and the pawn dares not take the bishop. 2 minor pieces and a queen against 1 pawn and a king. The arithmetic of the corner has already gone wrong for White. For if g2 ever grabbed on h3, the knight would smash into f3, and the king's shelter would fall in around it. White feeds in 1 more defender. The queen steps from e1 to e2. She too watches g2 along the 2nd rank, 3 white pieces holding the square, 3 black pieces leaning on it. The whole game has narrowed to 1 square, g2, and to whether White can hold it. White could try to trade a defender off, but every exchange only clears a path for the next black piece behind it. Breaks the balance. The knight on h4 takes the pawn on g2. The roof is torn away. It costs a knight for a pawn offered because a bishop and a queen wait behind it, all aimed at the bare king. Count it, and black is giving up material, but material is not what wins here. The open king is. White has no choice but to take. The bishop on f1 recaptures on g2. Each recapture is forced. White is being carried along a line it cannot leave. And the 2nd bishop follows it in from h3, capturing on g2 with check. The king is in check, and the reply is again the only one there is. The queen takes back on g2, stepping in front of her king. White has surrendered a bishop and a pawn. Yet the king still stands for one more breath. But the white queen is now the only guard near her own king, and a guard can always be chased. Black hurls in the last reserve. The queen swings from g5 to h4. She threatens the bishop on h2 and the dark squares by the king, while the bishop on e3 still soars toward f2. The bishop on e3 and the queen on h4 both point at f2, the square just in front of the huddled king. The idea is to crash through on f2 and split the king's final seam. And now white does the startling thing. The queen on g2 captures the rook on g7 and gives check. She throws herself away, only to drag one attacker off the board and win the king a moment to breathe. Without that desperate offer, black would simply have taken on f2 or h2 and walked the king down. It is the move of a defender who has read the position to its end and found only bad choices, and chosen the least ruinous. The king is obliged to take. It captures on g7. There is nothing else, the rook is gone, and the king walks out onto the open g-file. The white rook springs from c2 to g2, check down the open file. One more check, bringing a tempo from the wreck of the queen's sacrifice. The king slips back into the corner to h8. Two moves of checks have blown themselves out, and the king sits again where it started, in the corner. Look at what the storm has left. White gave the queen away just now. A queen for a rook, and no white queen remains. White still owns more pieces, two rooks, the bishop on h2, knights on b3 and d3. Those pieces sit far from the fire. On b3, on d3, on d1. A rescue party, a step too slow. Black has the queen on h4, a rook idle on f8, the bishop lodged on e3, a knight on h5, and the king cornered on h8. By the weight of wood it is nearly level, but only black attacks, and it is the white king with no heir. That is the whole marvel of this game. White reaches back to defend. The knight drops from d3 to e1, bracing g2 and f3. But e1 is a passive post. The knight now does nothing but guard, and the rook on d1 must nurse it. Black's last knight leaps from h5 to f4. From f4, it stabs at the rook on g2 and reaches toward h3 and e2. The little army never stops making threats. There is no rest for white answer one threat, and the next black piece has already found its square. The rook edges off the knight's fork from g2 to g3, still holding the file and still covering g2. With every rook move, the white pieces grow more tangled, tripping over one another around the king. Then the dark bishop uncoils from e3 to f2. It forks the rook on g3 and the knight on e1 at once. One of them must move, and the knight will be left leaning only on the distant rook at d1. The bishop that stood so long on e3 finally strikes, and it strikes forward toward the king. White saves the rook from g3 to g4, keeping the file and shielding g2 behind it. But the rook is running out of squares on that file. Each retreat costs a little more of the king's cover. Black's queen shifts down a step from h4 to h3. Now she threatens to arrive on g2, with mate the knight on f4 would guard her there, and she eyes the f3 pawn along the rank. The bishop on f2 seals the escape at g1, so once the queen reaches g2, the king cannot slip out the side. Only the rook on g4 and the knight on e1 still defend g2. Peel those away, and the king is finished. White's far knight races home from b3 to d2. It steadies f3 and the pale squares by the king, the best defense on offer, the queenside horse galloping back with no time to spare. It leaves the queenside entirely. White has given up every thought of counterplay and lives only to survive. But defense here is only delay. There are more attackers than the cramped white pieces can ever cover. Now the quiet dagger. The h-pawn steps to h5, and it attacks the rook on g4. One of g2's last two guards is being sent away, chased off by a single foot soldier. A pawn, the least of the pieces, doing the last of the pushing in a game full of sacrifices. The rook has no good square. It climbs the file to g5, fleeing the pawn. It had to move, but it kept its eye on g2 as it went. Because that is the thing about g2, it is still watched. The rook, even from g5, looks straight down the file at it. So the queen cannot simply arrive there, step onto g2, and the rook takes her, or the knight on e1 does. And this is the picture as it stands. The black queen on h3, the knight on f4, the bishop on f2, all trained on the squares beside the white king in its corner. White has more pieces on the board than black. Not one of them is doing anything now except standing in the way. A colder modern eye looks at this position and finds it already finished, a forced mate in 7, beginning with the rook swinging across to g8. And that is the last move anybody writes down. There is no checkmate on this board. The position is reached and looked at, and the record stops there. Underneath the moves, the result is written. Black has won. Let that board dissolve. The pieces go back to their homes. That was Zurich, and the man playing black had been playing chess for 25 years. 7 years pass. And now we are in East Germany, in a trade hall with 10,000 people in it, and the man playing black is 17 years old. He does the same thing. He gives white the middle of the board. Only this time white takes more of it than anyone has taken so far, and the white king never finds anywhere to hide. This game was played in East Germany in the October of 1960. The city is Leipzig. The building is the Great Trade Hall, where in ordinary years the merchants come. For 3 weeks it holds 40 countries and 232 chess players on 2 floors. As many as 10,000 people a day came to watch. There was no glass and no rope. A length of string was all that separated the crowd from the boards. Close enough to read a player's face, and the whole hall was blue with cigarette smoke. Germany was 2 countries then, and both of them had come, East and West, at separate tables in an eastern city. When they played each other, the match was drawn. 2 points each. Nobody won anything. Above the hall was the motto the Chess Federation has used for 100 years. Gens una sumus, we are one people. In Leipzig in 1960, that was quite a sentence to hang on a wall. The Americans had very nearly not come at all. Their own government did not want a team travelling behind the Iron Curtain and refused permission. It was reversed, late, after a good deal of protest. Among those protesting was the mother of the boy who would sit on board 1. The black pieces tonight belong to Robert Fischer, Bobby Fischer. He is 17 years old. He had won the championship of the United States 3 times already, the first of them at 14. He had been a grandmaster since he was 15, the youngest there had ever been. This was his first Olympiad. They put him on board 1 ahead of every older man on the team. On the opening night, before any chess was played, the city took everyone to the opera house. It had been rebuilt after the war, and it was very new. They played Cavalleria Rusticana. One of the East German players, Wolfgang Ullmann, remembered sitting there with his wife. And beside them, in the next seat, the young American. Ullmann said the boy's mind was so far away, so entirely on chess, that he slept through almost the whole performance. He remembered something else too, that in Argentina the year before, Fischer had had 5 suits made for him. And that as a young man, Bobby was really rather a likable figure. 3 weeks later, in the very last round of the tournament, Fischer played Ullmann and beat him. But that is a fortnight away yet, and none of it is settled. Because 6 days before tonight's game, in the second round of this same group, Fischer lost to a man from Ecuador named Cesar Munoz, who held no title at all. It was not a blunder. He was simply outplayed. So the 17-year-old sits down tonight already carrying a loss. The white pieces belong to René Letelier Martner of Chile. He is 45 years old, and he is not a footnote. He is his country's best player, and he has been for 20 years. He was born in a town called San Bernardo, south of Santiago, the youngest of 17 children. He learned the game at 12 from his brother Gustavo in the year Capablanca and Alekhine were playing their World Championship match in Buenos Aires. At 17, he beat the champion of Chile. He would go on to be champion of Chile 5 times over. In this year, 1960, he became an international master, the first Chilean ever to hold the title. 6 years before, at a tournament in Montevideo, he had finished first, ahead of the whole field, ahead of Miguel Najdorf, and ahead of Ossip Bernstein, who had been playing master chess since before the First War. He beat them both in their own games on the way. He never turned professional. He gave up studying law because the university would not let him leave to play abroad. So instead he took a desk, first at the Pension Fund for Public Servants, later at the Ministry of Housing. An office job and 7 Olympiads and 5 national titles all at the same time. There is one story about him that I like more than any of the others. One day the Chilean investigations police came and collected him, took him away without explaining. They drove him to the presidential palace. The president of Chile wanted a game of chess, and this had seemed to him the most efficient way of finding his opponent. Letelier told that story himself years later and told it fondly. Argentina offered him citizenship more than once. He would have been welcome there and better funded. He turned it down every time. He was not willing to sit down at a board opposite Chile. A master who knew him said, simply, that he never showed off, that he was modest, and that you could not reproach him for anything. And there is one more thing which matters tonight. 18 months before this game at Mar del Plata on the Argentine coast, Letelier had played Fischer. Fischer was 16 then, and had the white pieces and attacked all evening. The game levelled out and was adjourned overnight and came down at last to a bishop against a knight. Fischer was offered a draw. He refused it and played on and lost. So the older man across the board tonight is the only man in the hall who has already beaten this boy. It is the 8th round of the qualifying groups. Chile against the United States, 4 boards, and Letelier on the first of them. The date is the 24th of October. And the opening is the King's Indian defense. The same idea. Black lets white have the middle of the board and does not argue about it. And white takes rather more of it than is usual. 4 white pawns, side by side, across the middle. On c4, d4, e5 and f4. and on the other side of them, 7 black pawns still sitting on the squares they started the game on. It looks, for a while, like the most one-sided position of the night. The white king never does find anywhere to hide. 23 moves from now, it will be standing on e3, in the middle of the board, in the middle of the other army. And Fischer will put his queen on a square where a pawn can take it. The bargain of this defense is an old and strange one, and both players walk into it with their eyes open. Black gives ground on purpose. He hands white the center of the board and declines to fight for it. In return, he keeps everything flexible. His pieces coil up low behind their own pawns, patient, waiting. A bishop is laid out along the long diagonal, aimed straight through the middle of the board like a rifle set across a table. And the whole plan, the entire idea, is to let white build something grand, and then lean on it until it cracks. For white, the temptation is just as plain. All that space is real, and it can smother a man who gave it away too cheaply. So the two ambitions sit right on top of one another, a wall or a weakness. The same pawns can be either. If the wall holds, black is simply crushed, slowly, with no room left to breathe. If it does not hold, everything white pushed forward becomes something to be attacked, and there is little left behind to shield his king. That is the knife edge the two of them have agreed to stand on. So the questions are these. Does all that space become a fortress, or an open field with no cover in it? Which of the two positions cracks first, and who is holding the hammer when it does? And how does a king come to be standing out in the open, in the middle of the board, with the enemy still all around him? Close your eyes now, and let the board take shape in the dark. White opens by pushing the queen's pawn 2 squares to d4. It sits in the center, broad-shouldered, claiming the light around it. This is the first stone in a wall white would like to build across the board. Black answers by lifting the king's knight to f6. The knight eyes the center from the side, watching e4, in no hurry to be told where to stand. White widens the front, the queen's bishop pawn out to c4. Now 2 white pawns stand abreast, d4 and c4, a fence across the middle of the board. This is the way to the great center games, the ground where whole strategies are decided. Black plays a small, patient move, the g-pawn 1 step to g6. A little window opens beside the king, and you can already guess what it is for. The bishop is going to look out along the long diagonal from the corner toward the far side. Modern analysis calls this the soundest road for black, and it is the king's Indian defense taking shape. Black does not fight for the center with pawns. Black lets white have it and plans to strike it later. White brings the queen's knight out to c3. It guards the e4 square and stands behind the c-pawn, the most natural post it has. This too is the first choice of a colder, modern eye. Nothing wasted, everything pointed inward. Black completes the idea, the dark bishop settling on g7. Now feel that diagonal. From g7 the bishop looks past its own knight, down toward d4 and beyond. It is aimed at the very heart of white's position, a quiet gun behind a hedge of pawns. For now the knight on f6 blocks part of the view, but that will not last. White accepts the invitation and pushes again, the king's pawn to e4. 3 pawns now, c4, d4, e4, a broad unbroken chain across the center. This is white saying, I will take all the space and dare you to break it. It is the sharpest, most ambitious try, and the best move here, but ambition on this scale carries its own risk. A center this large is strong while it holds, and heavy to defend once it starts to crack. Black castles kingside, king and rook sliding across in a single move. The king tucks into the corner near g8, safe behind its little row of pawns. The rook comes to f8, and remember that file, because it may open one day toward white's king. Black is calm, castled, coiled. The whole plan is to let white overreach, then hit the base of that pawn chain. Now white does the boldest thing on the board, pushes the pawn on from e4 to e5. It lunges past the center and attacks the black knight on f6, which has nowhere comfortable to go. This is the four pawns attack in full cry, white throwing pawns forward to cramp black into a small space. The threat is simple: move the knight or lose it to a pawn. Black retreats the knight all the way home, back to e8. It looks humble, almost a step backward into the shadows, and it is exactly right. From e8 the knight unblocks the bishop on g7, so that long diagonal breathes free at last. And the knight is not lost. It waits, ready to come out again to c7, or to spring where the fight needs it. Modern analysis marks this quiet retreat as the finest square black has. Patience, not panic. Let the whole board settle for a moment before the pieces commit. White's pawns stand like a rising tide, c4, e5, and d4 behind them, with the knight on c3. Black is low and compact in the corner, king castled, bishop on g7, knight drawn back to e8. White owns space, black owns tension, and the promise of a blow against that overstretched front. White keeps building the wall, the f-pawn forward to f4. Four white pawns now stand in a great arc, c4, d4, e5, f4. It is enormous. It also has a soft spot, because a pawn that far forward cannot easily be defended by another pawn. The white king still sits at home in the center, and every pawn it might hide behind has marched away. That is the hidden cost of all this space. The shelter went forward with the ambition. Black strikes the very first blow at the chain, the d-pawn to d6. It leans directly against the pawn on e5, the front pawn, the proud one, and asks it a hard question. If white ever trades there, lines rip open toward that uncastled king in the middle. This is the king's Indian idea in one move: let the giant come forward, then chip at its feet. Modern analysis approves. Black is doing precisely what this position demands, no sooner and no later. White props the center up by developing the dark bishop to e3. It sits on e3, defending d4, the base of the whole pawn structure, and looks toward black's queenside. It is the soundest move on the board, a builder's move, keeping the great wall standing. But notice what has not happened. White's king is still uncastled, still stranded on its home square. All these pawns, all this space, and the one piece that matters most, has nowhere yet to hide. That single fact is the seed of everything to come. Hold on to it. Now black opens the second front, the c-pawn forward to c5. It jabs at d4, the very square the bishop just came to guard. Black is attacking the base of the chain from two directions at once, d6 against e5, c5 against d4. The whole white center is being asked to hold its shape while the ground shifts under it. This is the moment the position turns from quiet building into open argument. See the board as it stands, because it is about to change character. White, four pawns across the middle, bishop on e3, knights out, king marooned at home. Black, king safe in the corner, bishop glaring down the long diagonal, two pawns gnawing at white's base. Everything is coiled. The next capture decides which way the tension breaks. White takes, the d-pawn captures on c5. Rather than let the center be pulled apart, White grabs the pawn that came to challenge it. Modern analysis calls this the best try, releasing the tension on White's own terms. But look what it costs. The d-file is bare now, and it points, faint and straight, toward the White king. The Great Wall has its first true gap, and the pawn on e5 stands more alone than ever. Black has given a pawn to open the position, and an open position is exactly what the bishop on g7 wants. So the knight on b8 comes out, all the way to c6. It leans on the two things White has pushed the farthest, the pawn on e5, and the square d4 just behind it. Black is not trying to hold ground in the center. Black wants to knock it down. White has 4 pawns across the middle. c4, c5, e5, f4, a wall that looks like power. But a wall pushed this far forward has no one behind it. Each of those pawns is a target now, not a shield. White answers by resolving the tension himself. The c5 pawn captures forward onto d6. It bites into Black's position, sitting 1 square from the castled king. Black could take it back 2 ways and chooses the natural one. The e7 pawn captures onto d6. This is the recapture modern analysis prefers. It keeps the pawns knit together and opens the e-file a crack. Now feel what has changed in the center. The c5 pawn is gone. Only e5 and f4 remain of White's front line. And that lone pawn on e5 is beginning to feel the cold. The knight on c6 watches it. The pawn on d6 watches it. White decides to move his pieces before his pawns fall. The knight leaves c3 and steps into the middle to e4. From e4 it eyes d6, and it eyes f6, the soft square in front of Black's king. It is a fine outpost as long as Black lets it stay. Black does not intend to. The light bishop comes out from c8 to f5. The bishop and the knight now stare at each other, and the bishop also rakes down toward b1, where White's back rank is still asleep. White would rather not trade his handsome knight for that bishop, so he sidesteps. The knight drops from e4 to g3. On g3 it attacks the bishop on f5 and lends a quiet guard to its own kingside. The bishop is prodded, and it simply glides back 1 square, from f5 to e6. On e6 it does 2 jobs at once. It stands firm in front of the king, and it leans on the c4 pawn, the last survivor of that broad advance. Now White finally develops his last minor piece. The knight on g1 comes to f3. Goes up e5, the pawn everyone has been circling, and it reaches toward the dark squares around Black's king. Let the whole board settle in your mind for a moment. White's king still sits on e1, uncastled, with rooks on a1 and h1 not yet joined to each other. His pieces are handsome: bishop on e3, knights on f3 and g3. But the king has not found its home. Black's king is tucked on g8 behind the bishop on g7, that long, dark diagonal aimed straight across the board. Knight on c6, knight on e8, bishop on e6, rook on f8. Black is nearly finished developing and the safer of the two. The tension rests on 1 square, e5, and on the pawn beside it. That is where the game will crack open. Black lines up the heavy pieces. The queen slides from d8 to c7. From c7 she takes aim along the diagonal toward White's kingside, and she piles a third attacker onto that e5 pawn. White feels the pressure on the long dark diagonal, the one the g7 bishop owns, and steps his queen off it from d1 to b1. It is a modest square, but it clears d1 and quietly looks along the b1 to h7 diagonal in return. Now black strikes at the center. The d6 pawn captures on e5. This is the moment the position has been asking for, and modern analysis calls it exactly right. The proud pawn on e5 is taken. For an instant, black has won the center outright. But white has a reply ready, and it is a hard one to see coming. The f4 pawn does not recapture on e5. Instead, it rushes past to f5. This is the best move, and the whole point of it is that bishop on e6. The pawn on f5 attacks the bishop. It is hit, and there is nowhere entirely comfortable for it to go. White has ignored the pawn black just won, and gone hunting a piece instead. Tension answered with tension. Black replies in kind, not saving the bishop, but pushing past too. The e5 pawn runs on to e4. Now that pawn attacks the knight on f3, just as white's pawn attacks the bishop on e6. Two pawns, two pieces, each side threatening the other's man. Nobody has blinked. See it clearly because in a heartbeat it resolves. White's f5 pawn will take the bishop. Black's e4 pawn will take the knight. It becomes a question of who captures into more. White captures first. The f5 pawn takes the bishop on e6. A pawn now sits on e6 deep in black's camp, one step from the far rank, splitting the shelter in front of the king. And black captures back the way the record demands. The e4 pawn takes the knight on f3. This is the accurate recapture. The knight on f3, one of white's best pieces, comes off the board. That black pawn now sits on f3, right on the edge of white's uncastled king, poking at g2. For a moment, the material is even, and the position is jagged. White has a runner on e6. Black has a thorn on f3. White has to answer the thorn, and the clean way is to swallow it. The g2 pawn captures on f3. This is the move modern analysis marks as best. The pawn on f3 is gone, and white's own pawn stands there now instead, doubled along the f-file. But look what it cost. The g2 pawn has left it square, and the king on e1 has lost that little shelter beside it. The g-file is bare, the white king sits in the open center, and the black bishop on g7 stares straight down the long road toward it. Black answers in the center, and the f-pawn slides 2 squares to f5. It does not reach out for the white pawn on e6. That pawn is a splinter, lodged deep in black's half, and black means to draw it out, but not yet, and not by trading for it. Instead, the step to f5 throws a wall across the pale squares. It takes e4 and g4 from the white pieces, so nothing white can perch there. And the splinter on e6 is cut off, with no white man able to reach its side. The shape of the fight is set. Black will slowly strip that lone pawn away. White pushes the f-pawn 1 square to f4. The pawn on f4 seizes e5 and g5, and leans a small chain into black's half. It also clears the f3 square, opening a road for the light bishop to come out. But f4 is a lonely pawn, far advanced, and much later in the story it becomes a target itself. The black knight, tucked back on e8, springs out to f6. From f6 it holds the e4 square, the one hole white would have prized, and slams it shut. It steps in front of its own bishop on g7 as it lands. That is a screen black can lift whenever it likes, remember it, for the game will turn on it. White's light bishop leaves its home at last, stepping to e2. A quiet move, eyeing the long pale diagonal, looking toward f3. White's hope is simple. Trade a pair of pieces and take the venom out of black's game. Black lifts the rook from f8 to e8. Now it stares straight up the e-file at the white pawn on e6. The splinter is attacked, and no white piece can be brought to guard it. The e-file is becoming the one road that matters, and black is massing upon it. The white king takes a small step off e1 and onto f2. It slides out of the e-file, clear of the storm gathering down that lane. And it joins the two rooks along the back rank, so they can help one another. Yet the same step leaves the king a shade more exposed, a small price, white judges, and for now it is. Black's rook glides forward and takes the pawn on e6. The splinter is gone, one clean, and the rook stands deep on the 6th rank. From e6, the rook rakes across the 6th rank as well, holding the front of black's whole position. The game has quietly tilted. Black is a healthy pawn ahead, with the freer pieces. To win from here, black needs only this: keep every piece trained on the pale king, and never let it hide. White's hope is the opposite: trade the heavy pieces off, and let the king breathe again. White will not sit still. The rook in the corner swings across to e1. It grabs the open e-file, the very lane black just cleared. Rook faces rook up the middle, with only empty squares between. Black wakes the last piece. The rook on a8 travels over to e8. Two black rooks now stack behind the one on e6. The column is doubled. Weight against weight down the open lane, and black's is the heavier stack. And the white pieces that might defend, the queen on b1, the knight on g3, sit too far off to come home in time. Hold the whole board still a moment. The white king stands on f2. Its rooks are on a1 and e1, the queen far back on b1. Both white bishops sit on the e-file, the dark one on e3, the light one on e2, with the knight out on g3. The black king rests safe on g8, its dark bishop beside it on g7, that long diagonal screened for now by the knight on f6. Down the e-file, black has a rook on e6 and a rook on e8. Everything leans toward the pale squares by the white king. That is the tension. Now see how black breaks it. White's light bishop shifts once more from e2 to f3. On f3 it takes aim down the long diagonal at the black knight on c6. The knight is attacked. White still dreams of a trade to cool the fire. But the bishop has abandoned the e-file, the very lane where the danger lies. White is thinking about the knight, black is thinking about the king. Only one of them is right. Black lets the knight hang. Black gives up a rook instead. The rook on e6 drops straight down and smashes into the bishop on e3. A rook for a bishop, black is handing material back, and doing it on purpose. That dark bishop on e3 was the last true guard standing before the white king. Take it away, and the pale king on f2 lives in a house with no walls. The dark squares around it, e3, f4, d4, will have no one to hold them. This is the hinge of the whole game. From here, white's replies are all but forced. White must answer. The rook on e1 lifts and takes back on e3. There is no real choice. A black rook left that deep would tear the king apart. So the white rook sits on e3 now, square in front of its own king. And the second black rook comes crashing down. It takes on e3 in turn. Rook for rook, and once more black feeds a piece into the flames. The black rook rests on e3, a single step from the white king on f2. Nothing shelters the king now. Bishop gone, one rook gone, and this rook glaring in its face. White has no choice but to take. The king reaches out and captures the rook on e3. The monarch steps forward onto e3, into the very middle of the open board. Count the wood and white is ahead, 2 rooks, 1 for a rook and a bishop. But the king is bare, and a long way from home, and not one white piece can reach the fire in time. This was black's design from the start, not to win material, but to haul the white king out under open sky. 2 rooks offered one after the other to open a single door. This is the move the game is remembered for. Feel where the king stands now, on e3, on the 3rd rank, dead center, alone. Black spent 2 whole rooks to place it there, and still holds the queen, the knight, and the dark bishop. Behind the knight on f6, the bishop on g7 lies like a loaded spring. Let that knight leap, and the diagonal blazes open. The queen on c7 is coiled, and the pale king has no wall left on any side. And now the queen strikes. From c7 she sweeps down the diagonal and takes the pawn on f4 with check. She lands right beside the king on f4 and calls it to account. The white king on e3 is in check, and it must answer. No piece can block a blow struck this close. The pawn that stood on f4 is swept away, and with it the last cover on that wing. Only the dark bishop screened on g7 has yet to fire, and its moment is near. The knight on f6 holds e4 and g4. The queen holds the squares near at hand. The king's little world is shrinking to nothing, and the black army is folding in around it. Wherever it turns from e3, a black piece is already waiting. And that is the last move anybody writes down. And notice what it did. It put a piece on a square the other side could simply take it from. If that king takes, it is checkmate on the very next move. So the piece stands there and cannot be touched. There is no checkmate on this board. The position is reached and looked at, and the record stops there. Underneath the moves, the result is written. Black has won. Let that one go as well. 29 more years pass. Chess is catalogued now and defended much better than it was. A machine can be bought that plays it. The games are typed into databases. And in an insurance company's office building in the south of the Netherlands, the world champion sits down with the black pieces and plays the same opening Najdorf played in Zurich. For 12 moves, it is not merely the same opening, it is the same board. And then it goes somewhere nobody had been. This game was played in the Netherlands in the September of 1989. The town is Tilburg in the south of the country, and the tournament is named after the company that paid for it. Interpolis, an insurance firm. The chess was played inside their own office building, not a theatre, not a hotel, an insurer's headquarters on a quiet street. And on some days, 1,500 people came into that office building to watch 8 men think. It had been running since 1977, and by now it was one of the strongest tournaments in the world. 8 players, everyone playing everyone twice, 14 games each, over about 2.5 weeks. There is a small, precise fact about this particular year that I find quietly pleasing. Tournaments are graded into categories by the average strength of the field. Add up the 8 ratings, divide by 8. This one landed on the boundary, almost exactly on the line between one category and the next, which is why, to this day, the reference books disagree about which one it was. The black pieces tonight belong to Garry Kasparov. He is 26 years old and he has been world champion for 4 years. This is roughly the strongest anyone has ever been at chess, and it is happening while he sits in an insurance office in Tilburg. Players are given a number, a rating, printed twice a year on a list. The highest number anyone had ever been given belonged to Bobby Fischer, 2,785 in the summer of 1972. It had stood for 17 years. Kasparov arrives in Tilburg 10 points short of it. He will win this tournament with 12 points out of 14, 10 wins, 4 draws, and not a single loss. Second place, 3.5 points behind him, is Viktor Korchnoi. 4 days after the last round, an American newspaper did the arithmetic and printed his new number. He was past Fischer. The white pieces belong to Jerome Piket. He was born in Leiden, and he is 20 years old. He had become a grandmaster that same year. It is his first year with the title, and this is the strongest field he has ever sat down in. He is the lowest rated player in the tournament, and he will finish last, with 4 points from 14. So it would be very easy to tell tonight's story as a young man being run over, and that would be wrong. When he was a boy, the Dutch grandmaster Genna Sosonko took an interest in him. The story goes that Sosonko took him to Moscow to show him to Botvinnik. 3 years before tonight, at the European Junior Championship in Groningen, Piket finished second, behind a young man from Ukraine named Vasily Ivanchuk. But in their own game, in the 9th round, Piket beat him. Ivanchuk is in the Tilburg Hall this week too. He loses to Kasparov as well. And afterwards, Piket goes on. He becomes champion of the Netherlands 4 times. He wins Dortmund. He comes back to Tilburg in 1996 and finishes first in the tournament he is losing tonight. He reaches the world's top dozen players. He plays a match against Anatoly Karpov. 8 games. Every single one of them drawn. And in 1995, he beats Kasparov. There is one more, and it is my favorite thing in this whole story. In the February of the year 2000, there was a tournament played over the internet on Kasparov's own website. Piket reached the final against Kasparov. 18 moves into the first game, the connection at the Rotterdam venue failed. So they let him go home. He played the rest of it from his own house in a town called Najdorf, with someone sitting in the room to watch that all was fair. He drew the first game. He won the second, in a rook ending, a pawn up. From his living room, he beat the world champion in a final. In the early 2000s, he stopped playing professionally and went to work as private secretary to a Dutch businessman who loved chess and funded a great deal of it. That is the man across the board tonight, 20 years old and not yet any of it. The opening is the King's Indian defense, and by now it is 36 years since Zurich, and nothing much about it has changed. Black lets white build the wall across the middle. Black does not argue with it. Black walks pawns down the other side of the board instead. Kasparov had come back to this opening in the middle of the decade and was winning with it against almost everybody. And the story told about tonight is that Piket had been doing very well in this exact line himself, that strong players were starting to avoid it against him. I cannot prove that one, so take it as chess gossip rather than as record, but it fits what happens. Because on move 17, Kasparov plays something quiet that nobody had played there before, and every single thing that follows depends on it. This game has been anthologized. It sits in a book of the 125 greatest games ever played. And there is a sentence in that book's introduction that is worth saying out loud on Jerome Piket's behalf. The three authors wrote that what mattered was the quality of the play, not just the winners, the losers too, and that they had thrown out any game where the losing side put up little resistance. This game is in the book, so that is settled. It ends after 28 moves, with the material dead level, 31 points of pieces on each side. Nobody is winning on counting. It ends because a knight goes to the corner of the board. To H1, the square every chess teacher tells every beginner never to put a knight on. It is the same knight that started the game on G8 on the other side of the board. It will have travelled G8, F6, D7, back to F6, H5, G3, and then into the corner. And once it lands there, white has nothing to do. So here is the bargain both of these players are about to strike. White is going to take the centre, all of it. A chain of pawns across the middle of the board. A wall with room behind it to swing the pieces from side to side. Black could fight for that ground, pawn against pawn, and simply does not. Black gives it away on purpose and settles in low and patient, the king tucked behind a bishop in the corner. The thought behind it is older than it looks and colder than it looks. Let white have the middle, and then make all that space a thing white has to defend. Because a wall of pawns always leans somewhere. White's leans toward one wing, and that is the wing where white will roll forward. And black, having handed over the centre, is now free to hurl pawns at the other one. So the game quietly splits in two attacks on opposite edges of the same board, growing at the same time. White pushes where the wall points. Black throws everything at the squares around the enemy king. It becomes a race. Whoever gets there first and hardest is the one who wins. That is the whole gamble. It asks both players to attack and half ignore being attacked, and to trust their own side of the board more than they fear the other man's. It is a frightening thing to agree to, and it is exactly why a young attacking champion had fallen in love with it. So there are a few things worth waiting for. Which of the two races arrives first, and whether it even comes down to speed at all. What the quiet little move is, 17 moves in, that everything afterwards turns out to depend on. And how a knight, sitting in the very corner of the board, can be the thing that finishes it, with the material dead level, and nothing captured left to tip the scales. Close your eyes now, and let the board take shape in the dark. White begins by pushing the queen's pawn 2 squares to d4. A calm, classical claim on the centre. No fireworks, just a stake in the ground. Black answers by developing the king's knight to f6. It eyes the e4 square, quietly discouraging white from building the fullest possible centre all at once. White brings the other knight out to f3. Modern analysis calls this the best square, and it is the most natural of moves. The knight guards the centre and prepares to castle. Now black plays a small, telling pawn move to g6. This is the signature of the king's Indian defence. Black is not going to meet white's centre head-on. Instead, the dark squared bishop will be tucked onto the long diagonal, and black will let white build a big centre, then strike at it later. It is a defence of patience and coiled tension, and there was no greater master of it than the man sitting behind the black pieces. White grabs more space, the c-pawn advancing to c4. This too is the top choice. 2 broad pawns now, on c4 and d4, white's centre spread wide across the board. Black completes the fianchetto. The bishop slides out to g7. Picture that bishop now. It sits in the corner of black's castled home, staring down the long diagonal, from g7 all the way toward white's queenside. For most of this game, that bishop is black's soul. Everything it can see, it wants. White develops the queen's knight to c3. Again the best square. The knight braces the e4 break that is coming and adds a defender to white's spreading center. Black castles kingside. The king slips to g8, the rook swinging in beside it to f8. The king is housed now safe behind its little wall of pawns. But remember where it lives, because this whole game will turn on kings and their walls. White plays the big central thrust, the pawn to e4. There it is, the full classical center. Pawns on c4, d4 and e4, a broad wall of them across the board's waist. This is exactly what the King's Indian invites. White is handed space and a grand center, and in return black is handed a target. Black responds with a modest step, the d-pawn to d6. A quiet move with a purpose. It props up the coming e5 push and opens a lane for the light-squared bishop. White develops the last minor piece toward home, the bishop to e2. An unassuming square, but the right one. The bishop clears the back rank so white can castle, and waits patiently for its moment on the kingside. Now black strikes at the center, the pawn to e5. This is the heart of the whole opening. Black's e5 pawn walks right up and challenges white's d4 pawn face to face. The tension in the center is now the question the entire game is built around. White must decide, capture or push past or hold. For a moment, let the board settle in your mind. White's pawns stand on c4, d4 and e4. Black's stand on d6 and e5, pushing up against them. Black's bishop still gazes out from g7. Both kings are tucked away on the kingside, quiet for now. The center is locked in a staring contest, and how it breaks will decide which way this game leans. White completes castling, the king to g1, the rook coming to f1. Both sides are now housed and developed. The pleasantries are over, the plans begin. Black develops the queen's knight out to c6, and this is a small act of provocation. The knight leans against the d4 pawn, adding pressure, almost daring white to resolve the center. White takes up the dare and pushes past. The pawn advances to d5. This is the great fork in the road of the King's Indian, and modern analysis calls it the strongest choice. By pushing to d5, white locks the center shut and kicks the black knight off c6. And in locking it, white draws the battle lines for the rest of the game. Here is the deal both sides now silently accept. The center is frozen, so white will attack on the queen side, where the space is, pushing pawns toward black's king side of the board's other flank. And black will attack on the king side, throwing pawns forward at the white king, trusting that his attack arrives first. It becomes a race, two players charging in opposite directions, each hoping to land the blow before the other does. The black knight, chased from c6, retreats to e7. This looks like a backward step, but it is the best one, and it is full of intention. From e7, that knight is not going backward at all. It wants to travel to g6, and then leap forward into white's kingside as the storm builds. Every piece black touches now is being pointed, slowly, at the white king. White makes a strange, quiet retreat. The knight from f3 drops back to e1. To an eye new to this, it looks like undeveloping. The knight just came from the corner, and now it crawls back toward it. But there is deep logic here. The knight steps off f3 to unblock the f-pawn, so that later white can meet black's kingside push with f2 to f3 and a wall of its own. And from e1, the knight has its own journey planned toward d3, where it will lean on the queenside and support white's advance there. Both sides are rerouting their knights the long way round, each toward the flank it means to storm. Black echoes the idea, retreating the other knight from f6 back to d7. The same quiet cunning. That knight was blocking the f-pawn's path, and black wants that pawn to march. Now the f-pawn is free. Black is preparing f7 to f5, the hammer blow of the whole King's Indian, cracking open lines toward the white king. And from d7, the knight can swing to c5 or f6 as the position asks, never far from the action. See the shape of it now, with both armies leaning away from each other. The center is a fixed chain of pawns, whites on d5 and e4, blacks on d6 and e5, jammed together and immovable. That locked center is a wall down the middle of the board, and a wall means neither king can be reached through the center, only around the sides. White's pieces drift queenside, the knight on e1 bound for d3. Black's drift kingside, a knight headed for g6, the f-pawn ready to fly. Black's bishop still watches from g7, patient as ever, waiting for the center to crack so its diagonal blazes open. White completes the setup, the dark squared bishop coming to e3. Modern analysis marks this the best move, and it does two jobs at once. The bishop on e3 eyes the a7 square along one diagonal and lends a hand to White's queenside plans. But it also stands ready to swing to g5 or hurry back to defend, depending on which way the storm blows. The two armies are drawn up now, mirror images pointed at opposite kings, and the pawns are about to start marching. Black moves first, and the pawn standing before the king's own bishop lunges forward to f5. This is the move the whole opening was built to reach. Black's pawns on d6 and e5 already lean into the center. Now a third pawn joins them, daring the white pawn on e4 to take. If White captures on f5, the position tears open, and Black's pieces come pouring toward the light squares near the king. So the two sides have chosen their wings. Black will throw everything at the white king. White will strike far away where the black king cannot help. It is a race now, and from here the only question is who arrives first. White answers softly, a single pawn step to f3. It braces the pawn on e4 a second time, and quietly declines the invitation to open the board. White wants no torn lines near this king. White wants the center shut, so the fight becomes a slow, plodding thing, decided by marching pawns and not by one sudden blow. That is the wiser road, and modern analysis agrees, patience here, not panic. Black takes the hint and slams the door, pushing the pawn on to f4. Now nothing will be traded in the middle. The pawns lock, teeth against teeth, and the center goes to sleep. But the pawn on f4 does one more thing as it lands. It jabs at the white bishop sitting on e3. The bishop must move, and where it goes matters, because more black pawns are already loading up behind this one. White slides the bishop back one square to f2. It tucks in beside its king, out of the pawn's reach, still gazing down the long dark diagonal toward the far wing. A colder, modern eye calls this exactly right. The bishop is not buried on f2, it is waiting. For the moment, the queenside cracks open and it suddenly rules that diagonal. Now the storm truly begins. Black pushes the g-pawn to g5. Picture it. The pawn on f4 and the pawn on g5, shoulder to shoulder, a wall creeping toward the white king. The plan is plain and slow and frightening. Next comes g4, and then a pawn thrown at f3 or h3 to pry the files open. Black is in no hurry at all. Each pawn move is one more brick carried up to White's door. In 5 moves, if nobody interferes, those pawns are hammering on the shelter around g1. White does not flinch and does not defend. White attacks on the opposite side, the b-pawn striding to b4. This is the soul of white's whole position. Meet a wing attack not with a shield, but with a faster wing attack of your own. The pawn on b4 wants b5 and c5 next to lever open the black queenside, where the black king is only a distant spectator. Two clocks are running now. White must break through over there before black's pawns reach the king over here. Whoever's pawns touch the enemy king first will very likely win the game. Black brings a knight into the hunt, lifting it from d7 up to f6. From f6 it eyes g4 and h5, exactly the squares the coming pawns want to use. It also shields, for now, the light squares near its own king, a piece doing two things at once. One knight down, one to go. Black wants every attacker pointed at g1 before the pawns arrive. White keeps punching, the c-pawn advancing to c5. It leans hard against black's pawn on d6, threatening to rip the queenside structure apart. Where black is gathering wood for a fire around the white king, white is prying loose the timbers under the black king's supply lines. The same idea, mirrored, patience, then a lever, then an open line. The second knight reposition sliding from e7 to g6. It clears the way in the center and points itself at h4 and f4, deeper into the attack. Both black knights on f6 and g6 now face the white king together. The e7 square is empty, and the dark bishop on g7 can breathe a little further down its diagonal. This is the correct order. The modern reading confirms get the pieces aimed before the pawns roll, so the attack never stalls for want of a helper. Let the whole board settle in the mind for a moment. In the center, a frozen lattice of pawns, white on d5 and e4, black on d6 and e5. None of them able to move, all of them staring past each other. On the king side, black's pawns on f4 and g5 stand ready, two knights behind them on f6 and g6, everything leaning toward the white king tucked on g1. On the far wing, white's pawns on b4 and c5 are cocked, a bishop waiting on f2, rooks and queens still to be brought to bear. And back on e1 sits a white knight, quiet, undeveloped, the piece this whole story is named for. Keep it in the corner of your eye. Now white opens the wing, the c-pawn capturing on d6. The queenside is cracked. A file is about to swing open, and white's heavy pieces are hungry for it. This is the lever landing, the slow build turning, at last into contact. Black recaptures, the pawn stepping in from c7 to take back on d6. Black had to retake this way. Taking with anything else would only invite worse. But look what it costs. The c-file is now bare, an open road pointed straight into the black camp. The center pawns still lock the middle, yet on the queen side the dam has broken, and that is where white will pour through. White claims the open road at once, the rook swinging across from a1 to c1. It stands now at the head of the open c-file, staring down toward the black position. This is white's storm answering black's, the heavy pieces gathering on the side where black has grown thin. The pawn on d6 is a target, and the c-file is the corridor that leads to it. Black lifts a rook, quietly, from f8 to f7. It looks like nothing, but it is the first turn of a familiar machine. The rook rises so the g-pawn behind it can march on without shutting the rook in a cage. And once it sits on f7, it can slide across the second rank to wherever the attack needs a defender or a striker. White feeds another pawn into the wave, a 2 to a4. Behind b4, the pawn now props up the push to b5, ready to widen the breach. Slow, patient, unrelenting, the very same spirit as black's g-pawn, only aimed the other way. Every white pawn move buys a little more ground on the wing where black cannot answer. Black draws the dark bishop back from g7 to f8. It seems a retreat, but it is the next gear of the same machine as the rook lift. The bishop steps off g7 so that a rook can come to that square, onto the very file the attack means to blast open. And from f8 the bishop still watches the queenside dark squares, where white's pawns are storming, one piece quietly holding two fronts. Black is folding the whole army toward the coming assault, one careful move at a time. White presses on, the pawn to a5. It clamps down on the b6 square and fixes black's queenside pawns, laying the ground for the break to b6. Neither side has thrown a punch that lands yet. Both are winding up, and the whole board is stretched drum tight. You can almost feel it, two attacks racing, and only a move or two before one of them draws blood. Black develops the last sleeping piece, the light bishop stepping from c8 to d7. It comes off the back rank and looks straight down the diagonal at b5, the square white's pawn is trying to reach. It frees the c8 square and joins the two black rooks along the back. The army is nearly all in the fight now. Everything black owns is turning toward the white king. Everything white owns is turning toward the queenside. See the board once more before the first blow lands. White's king on g1, its bishop on f2, a rook on c1 commanding the open file, pawns on a5 and b4 leaning into the black position. Black's king on g8, a rook risen to f7, the bishops on f8 and d7, two knights on f6 and g6, the pawns on f4 and g5 hanging over the white king like a raised hammer. And still on e1, that undeveloped white knight waiting for its moment. Everything is loaded, someone must strike. And white leaps in first. The knight springs from c3 to b5. It lands deep in black's half, glaring down at the pawn on d6 and at a7 behind it. This is white's first piece to cross into enemy ground, a spearhead planted where the black king can do nothing to shoo it away. From b5 it also holds the important squares in the middle, so black cannot simply wave it off with a pawn. The race has its first runner over the line, and now the pressure sits squarely on black. White has arrived. The question turns to black: attack on, and ignore the knight, or stop and deal with the visitor gnawing at d6. Black makes the choice, and the choice is the storm. The g-pawn slides forward to g4. The knight gnawing at d6 is left exactly where it stands. Black will not turn around to swat it. See what g4 leans against? The little pawn on f3, the one square holding white's kingside together. If that f3 pawn ever falls, the long diagonal opens, the g-file opens, and everything points at white's king. This is the bargain black struck long ago. Throw the kingside forward and never look back. White answers in the same spirit. The knight springs from b5 into c7. From c7 it reaches into the corner, its eye on the rook waiting on a8. Neither side is defending now. Both are simply racing, each certain their attack lands first. And black does not save the rook. The pawn drives on, down to g3. Now g3 stabs at two things at once, the bishop on f2 and the pawn on h2. That is the shield in front of white's king, and black's pawn has a hand on it. White takes the corner. The knight snaps up the rook on a8. A whole rook in the pocket, but look where it sits, buried on a8, in the far corner, miles from the fire. That knight is a tourist now, while black's pieces gather at the gates. Black brings a second horse to the storm. The knight swings from f6 across to h5. It is aiming for g3, the very square the pawn tore open, a landing pad waiting. White feels the check coming and steps aside first. The king tucks into the corner. to h1. Off the long a7 to g1 diagonal, out of the line of the worst of it. Now the pawn feeds. It captures on f2, taking white's dark bishop. And there it stands, one single step from becoming a queen, lodged in white's throat. White has no choice but to take it back. The rook recaptures on f2. The rook guards the second rank now, but a rook on f2 with a knight loose is more target than guard. And the horse lands. The knight leaps to g3, with check to the king on h1. From g3 it forks, a hand on the king in the corner, and a hand on the light bishop still sitting on e2. White must attend to the check. The king steps back down to g1. And now black collects the old debt. The queen sweeps the length of the board and takes the knight on a8. Count it plainly. Black gave up a rook and has taken a bishop and a knight in return. Roughly even in wood, but far from even in fury. One side is attacking, the other only surviving. Hold the whole board a moment, as it now stands. White's king sits on g1, its shelter half torn away, a lone pawn on h2 beside it. The rook on f2 is doing double duty, and a black knight glares at it from g3. White still has rooks on c1 and f2, a queen on d1, a sleepy knight on e1, and a bishop on e2. Black's king rests on g8 behind the rook on f7. The queen has flown out to a8 in the far corner. The dark bishop still waits on f8, the light one on d7, and a second knight sits on g6. Between them, a wall of pawns. White's on d5 and e4, black's on d6, e5, and that ugly thorn on f4. The tension all lives on one diagonal and one square. The square is f2. White finally develops with purpose. The bishop slides out to c4. From c4 it stares straight down the light diagonal through to the rook on f7 and the king behind it on g8. It is White's one real idea over here. Get to that king before black's pieces finish their work. Black replies with a small, patient move. The pawn steps to a6. It shoulders the b5 square shut, so no white piece can settle there and bother the queen. Quiet, in the middle of a storm, but a storm you have already won is a thing you can afford to tidy. White lifts the heavy piece into the attack. The queen comes to d3. Now queen and bishop lean the same way, both diagonals bending toward the light squares near black's king. It is a real threat, and black must not simply gaze at its own kingside forever. So the queen comes home, all the way back to a7. And from a7 it settles onto the long dark diagonal, pointed straight at f2, and the king crouched right behind it. That is the whole game in one line of sight. Everything black owns now converges on f2. White tries to break something open before it is too late. The pawn pushes to b5. It knocks at the a6 pawn, hoping to crack a file or a diagonal toward the black king. Black simply takes, the pawn captures on b5. And the bishop takes it back, recapturing on b5. Now stop and look hard at f2 before the next move, because the next move is the reason this game is remembered. The rook sits on f2. Only the king on g1 defends it, and the queen on a7 already presses down the diagonal upon it. One more attacker on that square and the rook is simply lost. The knight on g3 is asked to be that attacker. And here it is. The knight retreats into the corner to h1. Not forward, not to the center. Backward, into the corner. The one square in chess a knight is never supposed to want. From h1, the knight touches exactly one thing that matters, the rook on f2. So f2 is struck twice now, by the queen down the long diagonal and by this knight buried in the corner. And the king cannot answer. Take the knight, king to h1, and the king has left g1. The moment it leaves g1, nothing guards the rook. The queen takes on f2, and the whole shelter caves in. So the king does not take. The knight sits there, in the corner, untouchable. A horse where a horse should never be, deciding everything. The rook on f2 is doomed, and behind it the king on g1 has run out of air. That is the position the whole game is named for. Black, a knight in the corner on h1, the queen on a7, and white with no way to hold f2. The storm on the king's side has arrived, complete, and white is helpless before it. And that is the last move anybody writes down. There is no checkmate on this board. The position is reached and looked at, and the record stops there. Underneath the moves, the result is written. Black has won. That is 3 games and 36 years. Zurich in 1953, Leipzig in 1960, Tilburg in 1989. A man who had lost his family in the war, a boy of 17, and a world champion at the height of anyone's powers. All 3 of them sat down and let the other side have the middle of the board. And in none of the 3 games is there a checkmate anywhere on the board at the end. In each one, the position is simply reached and looked at, and the record stops with the result written underneath. In Leipzig it stops 1 move early. The king could still have taken the queen. It is mate the move after that. There's nothing left to picture now. Let the pieces grow still. And slowly, gently, let the whole board begin to fade. The green squares and the cream, softening and dimming. Until there is only the dark and the quiet and your own slow breathing. You did beautifully. Rest now. Good night.